The desert burned beneath two merciless suns as a lone mechanic dragged his broken body from the wreckage, thinking he was the only living soul on this dead world, until the silence cracked with the sound of crying, faint and strange, echoing from beneath the sand. Cries not human, but desperate. And as he stumbled toward them, he had no idea that what he was about to uncover would test the very meaning of survival, compassion, and what it truly means to be human. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The shuttle trembled like a frightened animal as it tore through the dusty sky of Arona 442b. Alarms shrieked in the cabin, red lights flashing across cracked panels. Soren Key gripped the controls with hands slick from sweat. He was a skilled mechanic, but this was no workshop. The world outside glowed like molten metal under the glare of two suns, and the desert below stretched endless and cruel. His voice came out as a dry whisper. Hold together, just a little longer. The ship did not listen. The stabilizers coughed black smoke. Something deep inside the engine screamed like steel being twisted apart. The air smelled of burning wires and dust. Soren fought to level the descent, pulling every lever that still moved. The ground rose fast, orange sand and jagged rocks rushing to meet him. The crash hit hard. Metal howled. The shuttle slammed the desert floor, skidded and rolled, scattering parts like falling stars. Soren's head hit the side wall, and the world blinked black. When he opened his eyes, everything was sideways. Heat leaked through torn metal seams. The cabin groaned like a wounded beast. Soren checked his arms, legs, and ribs. Bruised, dizzy, but alive. Outside the broken window, the light burned white-hot and unkind. He crawled out through a split in the hull. The desert air struck him like a fist from an oven. The world was endless dunes and red rocks, glowing under the twin suns. No trees, no water, no shade, only silence. His shuttle lay on its back like a dead fish. The radio was crushed. The emergency beacon was buried under tangled wreckage. The water recycler was broken, and only 3 small bottles of water remained. The nearest human outpost was over 200 kilometers away. It might as well have been another planet. Soren sat on a sun-baked rock and stared at the wreck. His breath came shallow. He knew the truth of desert survival. Without shelter, water, or communication, he had maybe 2 days. Then he heard it. A faint sound, thin as cracked glass. He froze. Not the wind, not the groaning metal. Something else, something small. He turned his head, listening. The sound came again. Soft, broken cries drifting through the heat. It was not human. It was not mechanical. It sounded frightened, legs shaky, and followed the sound. He walked past shards of the shuttle's skin, over scorched sand. The cries grew clearer, desperate. 50 meters from the crash site, he found a slump in the ground near a pile of broken rocks. Sand had caved into a narrow opening, a dark crack like a wound in the earth. He knelt by the edge, heart hammering. The cries floated up from the darkness. Soren pulled his pocket light from his belt and flicked it on. The beam cut down through the dust. Something moved. 3 small shapes trembled in the shadows below. They were strange and ugly, yet heartbreakingly small. Their skin was gray-brown with patches like old stone. Their heads were too large for their thin necks. Several eyes perched on little stalks that twisted toward the light. Tiny wings clung to their backs like torn paper. They were slick with some dim shine, their thin bodies quivering. Logic spoke fast in his mind. The sun was deadly. His water was scarce. His beacon needed fixing. He had no strength to waste. If he wanted to live, he needed to save himself. But the cries would not stop. They cut through the heat, small and helpless. He shut his eyes for a breath and saw faces from long ago. His grandmother's steady gaze, the old shop foreman who told him, "Fix what's in front of you." His eyes opened. "All right," he whispered. He went back to the wreck and scavenged. He found a landing leg hydraulic arm, a rusted pry bar, cables, and the plasma cutter that still sparked. He gathered them like a man planning an impossible repair. When he returned, sweat soaked his collar. The sun stood high and merciless. Soren drove the pry bar into the sand and levered the first rock. It shifted, spilling grit. The cries rose. He worked slowly, careful, precise. Metal bit stone. Once, when the cries thinned to weak whimpers, he tied a bottle of water to a cord and lowered it into the hole. The smallest creature sniffed, then took a trembling sip. The other 2 followed. Their eyes turned up toward him with a look almost like hope. Time melted in the heat. He cut a heavy stone into pieces with the torch, each burst of sparks stealing more power from his fading battery. Every success revealed a deeper knot of stone. At last, a gap opened wide enough for the rope loop. Soren lowered the line, wrapped it gently around the largest creature's middle, and pulled. It came up heavy, slick, and shivering. On the surface, it collapsed in the sliver of shade. The second climbed more willingly, claws clutching the rope. The third did not move at all. It lay limp, ribs fluttering. Soren anchored the line, dropped down himself, and gathered the small body with hands gentler than the heat allowed. Its skin burned with fever. It weighed almost nothing. He held it against his chest and let the rope take them both back to the surface. Under the torn wing of the shuttle, in the shadow of ruin, he laid the 3 little beings side by side. The 2 stronger ones pressed close to the smallest, as if trying to give it their warmth. Soren knelt beside them, breathing hard, and looked across the desert toward the dark, jagged hills. The little creatures followed his gaze. One lifted a tiny claw, pointing. Soren understood. "We'll find your shade," he said softly. And for the first time since the crash, the desert felt a little less empty. The sun stood like a burning coin above the wasteland when Soren began his work again. The desert heat pressed down with a heavy hand, pulling sweat from his skin until his clothes clung like wet paper. The air shimmered in waves, making the distant hills bend and ripple like ghosts. Beneath the broken wing of the shuttle, the 3 strange creatures lay curled together, The largest twitched its clawed feet in restless dreams. The middle one blinked its many eyes and watched Soren with uncertain curiosity. The smallest did not move much at all. Its breathing came shallow and fast, like dry leaves rattling. Soren crouched beside them and whispered, "We'll get you out of this heat, I promise." He rose and went to the wreck, mind ticking like the gears of an old clock. Survival on this alien planet was not about strength. It was about cleverness. He had little water left, and almost no working systems. If he stayed here, the sun would finish what the crash had started. If he could reach the dark hills on the horizon, maybe there would be caves, cool air, and life, but the creatures could not walk that far. He studied what was left of the shuttle. The engine was dead, the radio was gone, and the cabin frame had folded like paper in a storm. Still, pieces could be saved. He found the cargo platform, strong, flat, and designed to hold heavy tools. Its mountings were twisted, but not beyond use. He also found two half-buried landing wheels, their tires still holding air. Working with the slow care of habit, he began to build. Metal shrieked as he cut through bolts with the plasma torch. He hammered warped panels straight enough to hold weight. He used braided cables as straps and sealed loose ends with molten scrap. Sparks danced in the sunlight like dying fireflies. Every motion cost sweat. Every sound echoed across the empty sand. While he worked, the creatures watched. Once, the middle one made a soft chirp. Soren paused to look at them. "It's all right," he said gently. "I know it's hot. Just hold on." His voice trembled from thirst. Hours passed. The shadow of the shuttle shrank until there was almost none. His water was down to half a bottle, and his lips cracked when he licked them. Still, he worked. As the twin suns tilted lower, the desert air softened from burning to merely harsh. The platform stood on two wheels now, its edges bound with cables. It looked rough and fragile, but it rolled. Soren pulled it in a slow circle to test it. The wheels wobbled, then steadied. He smiled faintly, a ghost of pride. He set up the emergency shelter canopy over the platform, fixing it with bent rods. It sagged like an old sail, but it would make shade. When he finished, his legs trembled with exhaustion. He sat for a moment in the sand, head hanging. The sky above was turning copper. Then he rose again. "Time to move," he murmured. He went to the creatures and crouched low. The largest shifted and hissed softly, but did not pull away when he lifted it. Its skin felt like warm stone, slick with faint slime. He placed it on the platform beneath the canopy. The middle one followed more easily, clambering up with awkward claws and folding its two small wings. The smallest lay limp. Soren wrapped it gently. Its body was burning hot, its breaths thin and fragile. "Stay with me," he whispered. He laid the small creature beside the others and draped the edge of the canopy for extra shade. He placed his last half bottle of water near their mouths. They sipped weakly, tongues flicking. Then he stood at the front of the platform, grabbed the pull bar he had made from a bent strut, and began to walk. The wheels sank in the sand, resisting every step. The platform groaned like a tired beast. Soren leaned forward, muscles screaming, and pulled. The desert stretched endless. He focused on the dark shapes of the hills, far on the horizon, sharp against the molten sky. If there were caves there, they might find cool air. They might find life. The creatures stayed silent. The largest watched the world with slow-moving eyes. The middle one nestled close to the smallest, covering it with its body. Soren trudged on. Every few minutes he stopped to rest, panting hard. The air was cooling now, and the first stars peeked out beside the brighter twin suns. The platform's wheels squeaked with sand, and his boots sank deep, but he kept moving. The desert survival training from years ago echoed in his head. Move when it is cool. Save strength. Plan for the long road. He measured his breaths, his steps, the distance left. When he glanced back, the crash site was just a shadow in the dying light, half buried already by drifting sand. Ahead, the hills loomed closer, black and still. Soren imagined cool stone, hidden water, and silence that was not deadly. He imagined saving these strange creatures, not because it was logical, but because it was right. As he walked, the translator device on his belt buzzed faintly. He had left it on by accident. It caught soft clicks and whistles from the creatures behind him and turned them into thin words. Home, shade, safe. Soren almost laughed. We'll find your shade. He kept walking as the desert night rose to meet them, carrying 3 fragile lives toward the promise of shelter. The hills rose like black teeth against the dim horizon when Soren finally reached them. The desert behind him stretched flat and endless under the pale glow of the twin moons. Every step had drained his strength, yet he kept moving, dragging the makeshift cart through sand that clung like wet cloth. The 3 small creatures lay curled under the sagging canopy, their thin chests rising and falling like tired bellows. The largest stirred first when the ground changed from loose sand to hard, dark stone. It lifted its many-eyed head, let out a faint trill, and tapped its claw against the cart's edge. The translator, clipped to Soren's belt, blinked and spoke in its cracked voice. Home, near. Soren stopped and raised his head. The hills loomed closer now, carved with narrow cracks like frozen lightning. He guided the cart toward the largest crack, where deep shadows breathed out a promise of relief. The ground sloped downward. Stone replaced sand. The air cooled with each step. His blistered hands tightened on the pull bar, holding the cart steady as it bumped and rattled down the rocky path. Then he saw movement ahead. 2 shapes stepped out from the darkness of the crack. They were taller than him, their limbs long and jointed like bent steel rods. Gray-brown skin glimmered with wet light, and eyes on flexible stalks turned to study him. They looked like grown versions of the creatures he had saved. Soren froze, heart thudding. The adult beings made low clicking sounds. The translator struggled and then spoke. Who? Come. Human. Soren lifted his empty hands. I found your young. They were trapped. I brought them back. The adults moved forward slowly. When they saw the 3 small ones on the cart, they broke into a... Their claws touched the babies with impossible gentleness. The young ones chirped and clung to them, even the smallest lifting its head weakly. The translator spoke again, catching the adult's words. Ours. Alive. Thanks. Human. Soren's shoulders sagged with relief. One of the adults, broader than the other, straightened and fixed its shifting eyes on him. "Come," the translator said in its broken tone. "Shade, water, safe." Soren nodded. They led him deeper through the crack, carrying the babies, now cradled against their chests. The tunnel swallowed them in cool darkness. The air smelled of stone and faint minerals. Drops of water clung to the walls like tiny jewels. The noise of the desert faded behind them until only the soft scrape of feet remained. They walked for a long while. The path finally the tunnel opened. Soren stopped, breath caught in his throat. A vast cavern stretched before him, glowing faintly with its own light. Smooth stone arches rose into darkness above, holding up a sky of black rock. Pale plants glimmered from cracks in the walls. Pools of clear water reflected the glow like pieces of fallen stars. And everywhere there was life. Creatures like the adults moved gracefully across stone bridges that spanned deep pools. Others tended gardens of glowing vines. Some worked at strange living machines shaped like coral and soft crystal. The air hummed with quiet voices, clicking and singing in layered tones. It was a hidden alien city, alive and breathing under the desert. The adults who had led him placed the young beside a shallow pool where warm mist rose gently. Others gathered, eyes swaying on their stalks, murmuring in their soft language. The smallest creature drank from the pool and let out a trembling sigh. The broader adult turned to him. The translator spoke. "Welcome to Kelvara." Soren swallowed. "Kelvara," he repeated quietly. He followed as they guided him toward the heart of the cavern. The ground was soft with moss-like growth that yielded under his boots. Strange tools grew from the floor like plants, changing shape as the adults touched them. They showed him a place where the rock curved into a smooth alcove lined with glowing vines. "Rest," the translator said. "Safe." Soren sank down, muscles aching, mind spinning. These beings had been called pests in stories he had heard back home, unworthy of notice. But here they were, builders, growers, caretakers of something beautiful. An elder creature approached, taller and thinner than the others, its eyes glowing faint blue. It made slow, careful clicks. The translator hummed. "You saved our young, risked your life." Soren nodded wearily. They needed help. Most do not help. What they call ugly. Soren met its gaze. Then, they don't see what matters. For a long moment, the elder said nothing. Then it made a low chime, and the city seemed to answer in soft echoes. They brought him clear water that tasted like rain on stone. They gave him food made from their glowing plants, soft and rich, with strange sweetness. They set warm moss for him to rest on. As he lay back, the cavern hummed around him, alive with quiet work and soft voices. The three rescued creatures slept near their parents, safe now, their small sides rising and falling in peace. Soren watched them through heavy eyelids. He was still lost on a harsh alien world. His shuttle, Soren, woke to soft clicking sounds echoing through the cavern. For a moment, he thought the crash had been a dream, that he was back in his small cabin aboard a working ship. Then the glow of the cavern walls came into focus, and he saw the young creatures curled together like strange gray stones, safe and breathing slow. The adults watched from nearby, their eyes swaying gently on their stalks. One of them stepped forward. The translator on Soren's belt crackled to life. "You rest. Now we guide. Secret ways through desert, safe from heat." Soren sat up slowly, his muscles aching from days of strain. "You would guide me?" he asked softly. "You saved ours," the translator said. "We save you." The words landed heavy in his chest. For the first time since the crash, the thought of home felt less like a fading dream and more like something he might reach. They prepared, quickly. The adult beings gave him a pack filled with clear water from the underground pools and dried strips of glowing vine that tasted bitter but filled his stomach. They showed him how to wrap a layer of moss-like cloth around his shoulders to shield him from the burning sun above. Just before they left, the smallest of the rescued young ones crawled to him. It made a soft trill and pressed its round head against his leg. The translator flickered. "Thank. Live." Soren's throat tightened. "Stay safe," he whispered. Then he followed two of the adults out of Kelvara, leaving the hidden city behind. They moved through tunnels that coiled upward through the stone. Cool air slowly gave way to heat again. When they emerged into the pale light of dawn, the desert stretched endless and silent before them. The adults led with sure steps, guiding him through narrow canyons where the sun touched only the highest ridges. They places Soren would have walked past without noticing. At night, they rested in hollows, where the stone still held the day's warmth, but shielded them from the biting winds. For 2 days, they crossed the wasteland like silent shadows. On the 3rd day, trouble found them. They came upon a wide valley carved between dunes. At its center stood a cluster of sleek tents and vehicles. Tall figures moved among them, thin-limbed and gray-blue, armor glinting in the sun. Soren froze. He knew the markings on their banners. The Huron Guard, soldiers of a powerful empire that ruled this region of space. They did not welcome outsiders. They did not tolerate strangers walking through their claimed land. "We go around," Soren whispered. But it was too late. One of the soldiers raised a weapon and shouted. Others turned, weapons lifting. There was no cover. The valley floor was bare. Running would only make them targets. Soren stepped forward slowly, hands open. The Huron soldiers closed in. Their leader stood taller than the rest, his armor traced with dark silver. His voice was smooth and cold as he spoke perfect human language. "This world is under Huron law. Why does a human travel with Karis creatures?" The 2 Karis adults stood silent behind Soren. Their eyes shifted uneasily. Soren drew a steady breath. "My ship crashed. These Karis saved my life. They are guiding me back to human territory." The commander's lip curled. "They are scavengers, not worth saving. You lower yourself, human." Soren felt anger rise like fire, but he kept his voice calm. "They are people. They have families. I will not leave them." A low laugh rippled through the soldiers. "Perhaps," the commander said, "the desert would be cleaner without them." He raised his weapon and aimed at the nearest Karis. Soren stepped between them without thinking. "If you want to harm them, you go through me." The commander tilted his head. One unarmed human against the Huron guard? Foolish. Soren's mind raced. He remembered a half-forgotten rule from old stories about Huron customs. He forced his voice to stay steady. "I invoke the right of challenge." The laughter stopped. Even the commander's eyes narrowed. "You know that law?" "One combat," Soren said. "If I win, we walk free. If I lose, you decide our fate." Silence hung heavy in the heat. Then the commander smiled slowly. "Accepted." They cleared a wide circle of sand. The Karis stood back, silent and tense. The fight began fast. The commander moved with deadly precision, armor servos hissing as he swung a long blade. Soren dodged, sand spraying under his boots. He had no weapon but his small toolkit. Yet he was a mechanic. He saw machines not as invincible, but as puzzles with flaws. As the commander lunged again, Soren ducked under the strike and jammed his plasma cutter at a joint in the armor. The servos on the commander's left leg stuttered. He pressed the advantage, darting behind and yanking free a power conduit at the armor's waist. The armor slowed, movements jerking. "How?" the commander began, but Soren cut him off. "I fix machines. Breaking them is the same process backward." The commander swung wildly, off balance now. Soren rolled aside, snatched a handful of sand, and flung it into the armor's cooling vents. Fans screeched, steam hissed. The armor locked up like frozen stone. The commander crashed to one knee. Soren stood over him, chest heaving. "This fight is done." Silence. Then the commander gave a single sharp nod. "You win. Go." Soren stepped back. The Karis moved quickly to his side, their eyes bright. The soldiers parted, letting them pass. Hours later, the dunes thinned. The air smelled faintly of metal and oil. Distant towers glimmered on the horizon, the edge of the human settlement. Soren stopped for a moment and looked back. The Karis stood at the rise of a dune, eyes turned toward him. "Bridge, now," the translator said softly, "between your kind and ours." Soren smiled faintly. "A bridge," he agreed. Then he turned and walked toward home, the desert wind carrying the first threads of hope behind him.